Antagonistic forces in the film canon are a dime a dozen thousand, and good antagonists are, even still, common as well. These iconic characters command the scenes they're in through the threat they pose to the protagonists, their wild or memorable appearances, and of course, their theme songs. Threatening forces don't even need to speak, and they don't even need to be human to command the respect of their audience. But what about adoration? How do you make a character more of a force of nature, something that causes awe, rather than just fear or respect? I'm going to commit a cardinal sin of classical cinematic conversation and look at the cinematography of some films that have devolved into CG and why they matter. How a certain franchise manages feelings of awe and horror by working against their own characters and worshipping the monsters. Godzilla isn't a new franchise, nor an entirely unique concept, but after the success of Pacific Rim in 2013, Legendary Entertainment steamed ahead again with Godzilla 2014 and the introduction of their MonsterVerse. As the franchise was established in American studios, a trend began to develop, Godzilla being more than just a response to the folly of man. Godzilla's origin in 1954 saw the gigantic lizard representing the horrors of nuclear weaponry, his origins based on real and current events at the time. The clear messaging being that nuclear testing and the development of nuclear bombs had to cease entirely for the good of the world. Legendary stripped much of that messaging, and in the early 2010s, applied a new, much more current message to a larger American audience. Godzilla had now become the force of the status quo, a monster with personal history long before man, and one that was not inherently malevolent. Humanity wasn't an obstacle or even an objective, just a new group of ants in the path of his existing motives, part of the scenery. It seems that the filmmakers understood one critical truth in the shooting and editing of these movies, whether on purpose or as a result of their budget. When going to see monster movies, people are there for the monsters. As a result, this Godzilla would take traits from the eras of Japanese films, especially the Heisei era, and become a sort of vengeful deity, and a character that the protagonist could both rely on and fear in equal measure. Adam Wingard, director of Godzilla vs. Kong, said as such. He claimed that Toho, the original studio, had direct rules for what the American studios could and could not do with Godzilla, and that
like one of them, for instance, is they don't want Godzilla to emote, you know, like in terms of like they see him as like this godlike force of nature, and so to them it's out of character if you have him reacting in a normal way to things, right?
Godzilla and his kaiju siblings were, through this line of films, the only characters that truly mattered to those watching. And the filmmakers reflected that understanding with the shots and the editing they produced when any of the kaiju were on screen. Let's look at Godzilla 2014 again. The film was memorable for viewers for the few scenes that Godzilla himself played a role in, and within those scenes is the key to why. Through the MonsterVerse films, humanity's understanding of Godzilla grows, and the monsters are shown more clearly with more characterization. But in 2014, Godzilla was at his highest height on the pedestal, being without a doubt the most powerful and important creature in any scene he featured in. The production shows this most impressively in his entrance, for many, the most memorable point in the film. We enter this scene with the stakes being established as Muto, the antagonistic monster in the film, attacks an airport, or rather, leisurely strolls through it. The creature barely acknowledges the humans, aside from swatting at them when they get too close, and with its size obscured by the darkness, it's nearly formless until lit by destruction that it caused. This creature has yet to be impeded for the length of the runtime, leaving unintentional destruction everywhere in its wake. As it approaches, however, water flows in, a natural opposing force being shown over 30 seconds before Godzilla appears, the size of his body bringing a flood before he even arrives.
Site 2 o'clock, 300 meters. Warlock 6, X01, target confirmed.
Godzilla's appearance instantly silences the screaming and chaos that had been mounting through several minutes of insanity as the Muto rampaged, the music itself having gone silent as he approached off-screen, leaving the only sounds the noise of his movement and the Muto's response. The camera first shows the Muto's reaction and the fearful silence of the humans below before showing anything more than a lizard's foot. The camera then slowly travels up his body before he roars into it, establishing his dominance in the scene. This sequence operates entirely at Godzilla's speed, completely disrupting the flow of the film and the chaotic editing beforehand, and bending the entire sequence around Godzilla's pace. The film itself has to adapt to his existence, and the pressure this conveys to the audience is heavy and intense, hence how memorable it continues to be. Unlike the Muto, Godzilla's never had an aerial shot, nor anything resembling a high-angle shot in this sequence. The only time the viewer can see his face, it's looking up at him in the darkness, partially visible as he roars down over the scene. The entire film functions on the whims and the actions of Godzilla, and nothing and no one else. But what about when Godzilla isn't the only dominant force on the set? What about when the forces actually match each other? My favorite sequence in American kaiju cinema must be the awakening of the kaiju and the ensuing battle in Godzilla King of the Monsters. While the film pits Godzilla against the three-headed dragon created to be his opponent, the scene actually begins on another kaiju, another metaphorical deity of the film.
You got a catchy name for this one?
Local legends call it Rodan, the fire demon.
That's comforting.
We begin this scene on the ground, with a woman and her child who we follow through the ensuing chaos. This works to ground the scene and establish actual stakes for the destruction sure to follow. As these characters run, they're shoved down and nearly trampled by the frenzied crowd, masses so desperate to escape that they're willing to act against each other. Then, similar to Godzilla's original entry in 2014, Rodan's cry breaks through the air, and the crowd instantly falls still and silent. These parallels help to build up the threat that Rodan poses, while also showing the clear hierarchy humanity's a part of. Rodan, a local legend, is far, far above what any of the humans below can comprehend or do battle against, a fact that is shown with a terrified silence lasting nearly a minute in an incredibly dense and chaotic scene. His appearance is shown again from below, even as he climbs out of the ground, framing his claws against humans around his nest, before towering over the town beneath him. Even the jets that come to intercept him, and their missiles, come from a lower portion of the screen. Buildup of the monsters continues in dialogue now, as Ghidorah is shown to be a moving tropical storm, fitting with Godzilla's new interpretation as a force of nature. These themes continue when Rodan finally takes flight, causing an Inferno Sandstorm shockwave hybrid in his wake on the town below. The film continues to show its allegiance, wiping away all other sound as he passes overhead, except for the screams of his victims. Even in moments where the human characters have a plan, the actions of the monsters, the framing of the shots, and the editing itself continue to follow the pace that the kaiju create. In a moment of confidence, the characters break through the cloud layer to lure Rodan away and finally occupy the upper third of the frame. Instantly, Rodan bursts from below, and the following shot places the camera centered directly on him, offsetting the jets below and to the side of him. Again, as they recover and mount an offensive, Rodan uses verticality against the jets themselves, showcasing his ability exceeding the talents of humanity in every way possible. At the end of his spinning maneuver, the camera even matches Rodan's movement and his rotation as he finishes wiping out the squadron of fighters. In each and every shot as Rodan dismantles the jets, he is above or equal with the camera, only breaking into the lower part of the image as they finally approach the larger threat in Ghidorah. When Rodan finally has his claws within reach of the mothership, he suddenly pulls back and away, seemingly without reason. However, in the darkness of the heart of the storm, lightning illuminates the sinister image of the three-headed dragon in flashes, and eventually the glow of his eyes and the silhouette of his wings become fully visible, blotting out the screen and instantly establishing himself as not only a threat, but an unbeatable opponent for their means, and for Rodan immediately afterwards. Again, it's shown that Ghidorah, like Godzilla, doesn't care about the humans in his path to even bother attacking, a parallel that immediately establishes their likeness, and clues the viewer in to the outcome of the following blow as Rodan is brutally thrown into the sea. The final shots to draw attention to in this sequence are not during the fight between Godzilla and Ghidorah, but after. The humans believe themselves to have killed Godzilla while allowing Ghidorah, the clearly more evil alpha, to escape his wrath. Furthermore, Ghidorah heals his wounds, making the struggles of the film so far pointless. Gloating in his victory, he mounts the volcano that Rodan had just emerged from and lets out a cry of dominance that resounds through the burning town and across the globe. This sequence ends with Rodan bowing in submission to Ghidorah and the human antagonist declaring,
"Long live the king."
As the three-headed flying snake screeches over the flaming remains of humanity across in the foreground, the symbolism is clear. The devil won the day, and the god Zilla that the military acted against was and is the only hope for mankind that remains. There are countless more examples in the MonsterVerse alone to back up the reverence, both in joy and in horror, that the films have for their monsters. In other films, this can often be seen as a negative quality as well as a positive one, contentious in many works. Examples include Zack Snyder's catalog and his penchant for worshipping his lead characters, even at the expense of the narrative, from Man of Steel to 300 to Watchmen. But in the MonsterVerse, the kaiju drive the narrative, not just Godzilla, and not just in dialogue. The films themselves bend around the massive weight that these creatures carry in every scene they inhabit, and this weight is conveyed well to the audience. With flawed or bland human plotlines and characters, and confusing or basic storylines, the success of the franchise stems directly from this intimate relationship that the films have with their monsters. The love of the creatures is clear, in such a way that despite tired tropes and generic blockbuster pacing, they shine through with their own dominant presence regardless. This is why these films continue to succeed. The screen itself sides with the monsters.